Okay, welcome everybody. Let me know in the comment section or the chat section if you can hear me well. If the microphone is working well, the camera is working well, you can write down in the chat section. That would be very helpful for me to know if the technicalities are correct and everything is working as it should. Just looking. Slava Zeus, Ontario Oblast. Thank you, Hugh. Perfect. Appreciate the support. Okay, so I'm guessing that the mic is working well, that you guys are seeing me. Perfect. So, again, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to take too much time today. I wanted to make a quick live stream because we have a big announcement last night of this minerals deal that was signed between Ukraine and Russia. Russia, oh my God, fruit and slip here, and the United States. So I'll cover that first. Imagine a minerals deal being signed by Ukraine and Russia. That would be something unexpected. And then I'll talk a little bit about the ceasefire. Putin announced a ceasefire on the weekend, and I'll talk a little bit about it, the implications here. And last but not least, I want to cover a little bit about Canadian politics. So for my Canadian viewers, this might be interesting, but I want to talk a little bit about the latest elections that occurred on Monday, and just my thoughts and opinions about it. So it's not going to be a long live stream, but of course, I want to talk first about the big deal between the US and Ukraine. So overall, I looked at it, the provisions, the clauses, and it appears to be, in my opinion, a pretty good agreement. And that is kind of crazy to think, because just a few weeks ago, we remember how toxic this deal was, what kind of unfair, extortionist clauses were being pushed by the United States, by Trump's team, right? That Ukraine owed this massive debt, or $350 billion to the US, which was clearly invented by Trump's team, right? It was only existing in their imagination, but like, it was just a pure extortion deal that was being pushed by the United States. And thankfully, Ukraine was able to withstand this psychological pressure by the US. So I'm very happy to see that Ukraine did not budge, and the Ukrainian people were very resistant to signing it. And that's how Trump deals with these deals. You've been seeing that not only with Ukraine, but with the tariffs, with any other agreement, or even with regards to Greenland or Panama, right? It's like he just uses the kind of nuclear option right away, tries to threaten you. And then when you realize that that doesn't work, you see that the temperature starts lowering. And so the same thing occurred here with Ukraine. I think that Zelensky's team understood that very well. It took that assignment very seriously, and they started working diligently with the US side to try to amend this deal to make it more, I guess, realistic and workable. So I'll talk a little bit about the provisions that were added here, but I'm going to read some of your comments loud and clear. Thank you, Hugh. Hey, Chrissy. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Ceasefire. Great idea. Yeah. How many of them, has Putin proposed in the last few years? So I'll talk a little bit about it, but it's just kind of, nobody even takes it seriously. Even the United States at this stage doesn't take Putin's ceasefire announcement seriously. It's purely for his internal public audience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the minerals deal. So here are the provisions. It mentions that there's full ownership and control over resources that remains with Ukraine. Remember that before, it actually was the US that controlled 51%, if I remember correctly, ownership control over these resources. So Ukraine pretty much loses the entire control over resources. Like, this is Ukraine. This is not the United States of Ukraine. So we can see that Ukraine remains, controls and has full ownership of its resources. It's a 50-50 partnership structure. Ukrainian sovereignty is guaranteed, whatever that means. It's very broad. State-owned companies will remain Ukrainian. No debt for Ukraine. That is very important. Remember, I just talked about the $350 billion debt that Ukraine owed the US. that was in the very first deals that were being pushed. That is gone. This agreement also complies with Ukraine's EU integration plans, because remember that apparently, the US was asking that essentially they would have a say into Ukraine's accession plans with the EU, who they would be working with as investment partners, right? Like essentially delegating, giving the entire control to the US over who controls what and what Ukraine does with its own resources. Funding from new licenses only. The US will also help attract additional investments in technologies. All fund income and contributions will be tax free. And for the first 10 years, all profits will be reinvested in Ukraine. And I think the most important as well is that um, basically Ukraine and the US are going to create this, mutual fund into where the US and Ukraine will be investing into, which will provide the funds for investments into Ukrainian resources and building these enterprises. And here, the most important one, which I find to be very positive, is that what would be considered an investment from the United States is providing weapons, so selling weapons to Ukraine. This is a massive, massive big deal for Ukraine. Remember that for the last few months, Trump has been refusing to sell weapons to Ukraine. Even a few weeks ago, Zelensky was asking the US that we're ready to buy Patriot air defense systems. Even though they're $1.5 billion each, we're ready to pay for this. We absolutely need them. And remember that Trump responded very cynically by saying, oh, he's always looking for weapons. He's always looking for missiles. We'll see what happens. But here, the US providing weapons to Ukraine would be seen as an investment into this mutual fund for this minerals deal. So this is a very, very big precedent. And again, it's been confirmed that the US right now, under Trump, will transfer over $50 million worth of weapons to Ukraine in the next coming weeks. We understand fully that this is peanuts. $50 million in terms of military assistance is absolutely nothing, right? This would be something you would see perhaps in early 2022 when the war started. But at this stage, Ukraine's needs are, we're talking about billions of dollars, not $50 million. But it's more about the precedent that it sets, that now the US can sell legally to Ukraine its own weapons. Defense companies in the US can sell missiles, artillery, whatever. And there is no more restrictions. And Trump, I guess, is opening slightly the floodgates to that. So this is very, very good news in my opinion. So this is leading the way to a possible lend-lease that could be set up in the future. I'm saying could be because we don't know what's going to happen. Trump can always change his mind last minute, of course. But again, it's a win-win situation for both the Ukrainians and the US. Because again, Trump gets to say, as he's been saying for years, that I'm not selling anything to Ukraine or giving anything to Ukraine for free, right? That Ukraine will have to pay for it. Fair enough. I'm not criticizing this because it's up to the American people to decide if they want to give assistance to Ukraine for free or not. But it was more about him not selling anything to Ukraine, which was a problem, right? He was just absolutely refusing to transfer anything apart from just maintaining the help that Biden agreed in his last few weeks to transfer to Ukraine, right? He was like just signing these transfers of weapons in the last few weeks that were like in the billions of dollars because he understood that Trump could very well just decide to just end that. So thankfully, we're seeing some positive signs here. And, this would not be possible either. I need to mention that the Ukrainians have done very great work, not falling under the pressure, not crumbling under the pressure, and continuing to push back against this marauding, marauder style of extortionate style, I should say, of dealing that Trump displays. So, big kudos to the Ukrainians and the lawyers and the politicians that were behind this. But also thanks to Europe, because Europe really led the way. They've allowed the Ukrainians to meet several times with the US counterparts. We've seen Paris. In Paris, they met in London. And so Europe has really facilitated, in making this deal more workable for the Ukrainians. And many are saying that now, the French president, Macron, and the Prime Minister of UK, Starmer, were directly involved into this. So big thank you to them. Politico also reported that the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, Defense Secretary John Healey, from the UK had played key roles in talks with the US administration. Their efforts were coordinated with Mark Burnett, the US Special Envoy to the UK. For his part, they held 13 conversations with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in 2025 alone. And Starmer and Trump had spoken almost as many times. And apparently, they're also saying that Zelensky had clearly managed to affect Trump's thinking in Rome. Now, this one is a little bit too ambitious. To convince Trump to change his thinking is wishful thinking. I don't believe it. Clearly, the meeting that they had in the Vatican was very last minute. It seemed to go well because both sides, even Trump, admitted that it was very well. It was a really great meeting. Of course, we can't expect anything different from Trump, but it seemed to be pretty cordial, and it seemed like it went very well. But I don't think that this meeting in the Vatican during the Pope's funeral somehow changed Trump's view or mind about the war, that now he needs to be more pro-Ukraine and just side with Zelensky. I seriously doubt that. But I think that there was some great achievements done in the last few weeks that allowed Ukraine to finally get past pass through this very tumultuous last few months where the US was just trying to pressure Ukraine to sign this deal that was just absolutely there would be no way that Ukraine could agree to this. But one last thing I want to mention here is that we also need to remove our rose-colored glasses. I'm seeing a lot of articles today talking about how the US now is fully agreed to side with Ukraine, and now they're pro-Ukraine, and that it's basically the US and Ukraine are now going to be allies, and Russia is cornered. Let's put our rose-colored glasses away. First of all, I've mentioned this many times, but this is decades in the works. To think that somehow tomorrow US companies or other foreign companies are going to start investing and building mines in Ukraine, it's not going to happen. And I think part of the provision in this deal was that it only start when the war is over. So of course that can be anytime. It could be tomorrow, which is very unlikely, or in a few years, more likely. So this is years in the work, and this deal will outlive Trump. And so it remains to be seen how actually effective, and even if it will even exist in 10, 15, 20 years, right? It's a huge question mark. So it's more of a political win for Trump and Ukraine, right? Trump gets to say that, look at me, I made a great deal with Ukraine. They signed it, and finally, we're not just giving away freebies to Ukraine, and I'm a great deal maker. So it's more about the first 100 days for Trump to showcase that there's something positive coming out of his administration, that is able to sway other countries to agree to things. So there's that. But to think that somehow tomorrow the US or US companies are going to start investing into Ukraine, that's just not going to happen. And also, did we forget as well the path that we took to get here? The last few months have been absolutely crazy for Ukraine, and crazy in the bad way, with Trump calling Zelensky dictator, that the Ukrainian people are at fault for starting the war, right? He's used every single instrument in the toolbox to try to pressure Ukraine to just sign that first initial deal, which would pretty much relegate control to the US over Ukraine resources. Because he said, why not, right? Ukraine is desperate. Maybe they'll sign it. Who knows? That was kind of the approach that Trump took. And he's taking that with every single decision he makes. And so, we also need to remember that Trump has ripped up many agreements in the past. And I think the best example here is with Canada and the Mexico free trade agreement deal that was signed, I believe, in 2018, that was renegotiated. So back in the 90s, NAFTA was signed between Mexico, Canada, and the US. I think it was under Bill Clinton. I could be mistaken here. Maybe it was under President Bush Sr. I don't remember correctly when exactly it happened, but it was back in the 90s. And then Trump said it was a terrible deal. We need to renegotiate it. And so they did. But in 2018, he signed it very happily. But now he says that it was a terrible deal, and that Canada and Mexico are just ripping us off. So, his word means absolutely nothing. And his administration, their actions are clearly showcasing that they can absolutely change their stance at any moment if they want to. And they'll always blame the other side. Just look at how the first 100 days, I was just looking a few days ago when it was basically that like milestone 100 day, first 100 days of Trump. And he just went absolutely crazy because the polls are clearly showing in the US that the American people are not happy with Trump in terms of him dealing with the economy, with geopolitics, and the U.S. position in the world. Of course, farmers are also very heavily impacted in the U.S. But the most important thing is that I believe like somewhere around uh, over 51 to 52% of people disapprove of Trump right now, which is a pretty big achievement in a negative way for Trump because these numbers have been seen ever, right, in the first 100 days. So Trump was just going absolutely crazy saying that, what are you talking about? These fake polls and these fake news media were saying that, I'm not popular, that I'm not doing well, but we're bringing America back again. And the golden age of America is coming back without any real substantial facts as to how he brought America back. Instead, in the last few months, everything has been just disastrous for Trump. There's been very little positivity coming out of his administration. And as you see, Nemesis, his position is getting shakier by the day. Exactly, right? Like there was a lot of leeway in the first 100 days, right? It's historically like that in the US that you give kind of the time, the first 3.5 months to the president to get things going and showcase what he or she can do. Of course, we're hoping that maybe in the future there could be a female president, but that's besides the point. We want to see what are the actual capabilities of the president. And so far, there is absolutely nothing positive from Trump. His position, as you mentioned, Nemesis, is getting shakier by the day, and he feels it. And that's why he went absolutely crazy on Truth Social a few days ago, just reposting and saying, I'm the best president. Look at these news media praising me. And, he was really trying to convince his audience that he's the best. Right? He always does that. But I just kind of saw 20 Truth Social posts from him a few days ago. Les was not crazy. He's full with his team project 2025. He's more than halfway done. Only justice seems to hold up right now and not sure how long. Well, I think it's crazy that he's just blindly following Project 2025 policies without even questioning what he's doing, if that's the case. I did say in many videos early in January that this seems to be the case, that this whole Project 2025 book, I guess, full of like propositions of what the next Republican Party should do. And it had just absolutely insane propositions. But the fact that he is, just going along with it. And I remember even a scene where he was just signing executive orders. He's like, oh, there's a big pile here, like kind of showcasing that he doesn't even know what he's signing. So that is crazy coming from a president of the United States, somebody that needs to be held to the highest of responsibilities, somebody that needs to be capable and understand what he's actually doing, understand the weight of his or her decisions, right? This is absolutely instrumental as being part of the president, that, your decisions have so much weight, they have so much impact. And Trump simply doesn't care. You're seeing that, right? Tomorrow, maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see what happens, right? That's just a typical line from Trump. So what I'm saying here, coming back to the minerals deal, is that let's remove our rose-colored glasses, actually, and let's remember that Trump is Trump. You will not convince him to side with Ukraine or Russia. You're seeing that he's going to continue playing this game. For him, it's a show, and even the meeting in the Vatican was a show, right? We didn't even talk about the Pope stuff. We talked about how, Zelensky and Trump met in um, this beautiful setting, right? That picture was the headline during the Pope's funeral. That's crazy, right? And again, Trump made it happen because he wanted to be the center of the attention, even when it's somebody else's funeral. That's just crazy to me. But yeah, I agree with you, Les, that we need to have our eyes open here when it comes down to Trump's actions. I think that they're very well opened after over 4 months, close to 4 months of his presidency. I think that I'm not under any impression that somehow this is, going to change the outcome. The only thing I've said, a massive precedent that it sets, this new agreement between Ukraine and the U.S., is that Now, the US is opening the gates for Ukraine to buy weapons from the US. Yes, at a cost, but this will be seen as a US investment into this minerals fund. So that's very good news. And I'm hoping that in the future, over the next few weeks, there's going to be more announcements from Washington, from the White House, in terms of transferring and sell weapons to Ukraine. I hope so, because we also know that the deadline for Putin is coming, and countries in Europe, leaders in Europe, and even Marco Rubio said that their patience is coming to an end, and they want some meaningful actions from Russia as well. So Putin has very limited time, and so what we're seeing right now, and that brings me to the other subject, is the ceasefire that Putin announced and declared this weekend, which quite honestly was, again, is a huge joke because he announced one in Easter. And what happened? They violated, I think, according to Ukrainian numbers, like 30,000 times this, Easter ceasefire that was announced about 2 weeks ago. And so, to me, what it shows is that the fact that it's only coming from the Russian side, from Putin's side, there was no announcement from the US. It means that this something didn't go well between the meeting with Witkoff and Putin in the Kremlin. I think he went for like a fourth or fifth time he met with Russia, or went to Russia to meet with them. And to me, it showcases that Putin is going for a last kind of Hail Mary attempt to showcase that, oh, I'm ready for a ceasefire, but in reality, I'm not. Trying to showcase that, manipulate Trump essentially. And, otherwise, it would have been announced by both sides if it was agreed by the US and Russia. And again, 3 days is not what the US wants. The US wants a permanent ceasefire. We understand fully well why Putin is doing that. It's on the victory day, right, from May 8th to May 10th. So Putin absolutely needs to have full guarantees that there will be no missiles, Ukrainian drones flying into Moscow during the May 9th parade. We also remember that for the last few years in Russia, the parades have been pretty bad, meaning that many of them were canceled across many different Russian cities. In Belgorod, closer to the border with Ukraine, they were completely canceled. And it's a big day for the Russians. I've already said that many times, but for the Russians, this is kind of like Christmas in terms of importance. It's along, the top three most important days for the Russians. And, for them to see it constantly getting canceled has massive psychological effects on the Russian people, because they have to question themselves and say, what's going on? If we're winning the SMO, why are our victory parades are getting canceled? And also, the most important for Putin is not the people, but he invited a bunch of world leaders, including Xi Jinping, to Moscow on May 9th. And he absolutely wants to assure that there will be no Ukrainian missiles and drones flying to the Kremlin. Now, I have some bad news. I really do believe that on May 9th, there will be no Ukrainian drones and missiles flying towards Moscow. At least Moscow, I can confirm that. Because if there's been already a few European traders, including Orban, who mentions that he's going to fly to Kremlin, to Moscow, to celebrate Victory Day parade. So I believe that Ukraine will have the choice but to not fire towards Moscow. But what we also know is that Putin's declaring this 3-day ceasefire to rearm, but also to move some of his air defense systems to Moscow, because he also wants to guarantee security, even though it's pretty certain that Ukraine will not fire towards Moscow on May 9th. It's possible, but very unlikely. He will have to move a lot of air defense systems in Moscow to protect the skies. This means that he needs a day before May 9th to move all the equipment, maybe a day or two to move the equipment, and then a day after the Victory Day parade to move it back to the front lines or elsewhere. So this is a wonderful opportunity actually for Ukraine to not be firing towards Moscow, because, yes, it has significant symbolic importance to do that, but I think the most important is to actually destroy strategic assets on the front line, and that's where they're going to be the weakest during that weekend. From May 8th to May 10th, when all the air defense systems are going to be concentrated in Moscow, but not elsewhere, in Donetsk, in Belgorod, in Kursk, in other regions, in Bryansk, in Russia. And that's going to be a wonderful opportunity for Ukraine to target these very, very weak and unprotected targets, whether it be airfields or ammunition depots, like what we saw last week when Ukraine blew up this massive ammo depot in Moscow, close to Moscow, about 60 kilometers away, northeast of Moscow. So Ukrainian drones actually flew past the capital and were able to strike this massive arsenal just northeast of Moscow. So Ukraine has those capabilities. Ukraine can strike easily Moscow, but in terms of value proposition, what it gives Ukraine is very limited when you're just going to be focusing on the red square instead of focusing on what really matters. That is the ammunition depots, military airfields, HQs, etc. Всім бажаю здоров'я. Sorry for being late. Thank you, sir, for this. Thank you for your constant support. I appreciate it. And I know I haven't been making as many regular updates in the past 2 weeks, but I've been very busy outside of YouTube. And I'll share some more details of what I'm working on right now. But I'm going to get back to making more regular updates in the next few days. So I'm very glad to do that, come back and make more regular videos for you guys and more updates. But honestly, it's so hard to catch up. With Trump, there's just so many announcements, so much back and forth, so much nonsense going on. We're really focused on Trump, and rightfully so, right? Because Ukraine still is very reliant on US assistance, unfortunately. But it's hard to sometimes make your videos because as you finish uploading, something completely shatters the content that you just analyzed and discussed. And that happened to me, if you guys remember, back on February, in late February, when Zelensky met with Trump in Washington, that disastrous meeting. And I said that, don't worry, things are going to be great. Now they're going to finalize the deal. And then we saw what happened, and so it's hard to keep up with Trump sometimes. And yeah, I agree, Les. I've actually done a lot of live streams this year, but I want to continue making them because it's a lot easier for me to actually talk and discuss content through live streams. And I actually need to start implementing as well a lot of visual aspects. So like sharing the map, discussing the map details. I think it's going to be my go-to formula for the next few months. I think I'm going to start working on that. And I'm going to try to make more live streams than just videos because I really do like live streams. I get to interact with you guys more, answer your questions, talk with you, and perhaps even invite some guests in the future, talk with other pro-Ukraine activists and analysts. And I think that's going to be really great. So, yeah, I agree with that. Nemesis. Maybe Trump can sell him some more Patriot batteries. I hope so. I hope that this new minerals deal will allow Ukraine to finally purchase what is needed. It could even be better, right? Like if we're really being optimistic here, it could be even better for Ukraine because we know that under Biden, yes, Ukraine was getting freebies technically, but it was getting very old equipment and very late. Right, that was one of my criticism of Biden. As much as I love him and he's a great president, he did a lot for Ukraine. You guys know that in the last 3 years of me making videos, I've been criticizing him heavily because of his late decisions, which quite frankly are on purpose, right? He always delivered weapons late. Look at the Atacms, the Abrams, the F-16s, which quite frankly, the US never delivered to Ukraine, but they gave the approval finally to Europe to transfer them to Ukraine. But everything was always delayed on purpose because they didn't want Ukraine to have that tactical advantage, which would allow the Ukrainians to decisively destroy key facilities. Let's say with Atacms, when the Russian ammunition depots and airfields were full of their jet fighters and strategic bombers that were well within range of the Atacms, Ukraine could have just went on a campaign of 2-3 weeks of just obliterating them, not giving the time for Russia to adjust. And that's it. You have a very weakened Russian Air Force. Instead, what we saw is maybe we'll think about it, but that's not what Ukraine needs. Actually, what Ukraine needs is to mobilize more people. Yes, that's important. I agree. But at the same time, let's not pretend that the long range or medium range ballistics are not going to help Ukraine. And that's always been kind of the strategy by Biden, unfortunately. So I'm also not putting my rose-colored glasses with regards to the Biden administration, which, again, I need to highlight how important they were. And even Minister Kuleba, the previous foreign minister of Ukraine, mentioned that without Biden, he doesn't see any other president that would have given so much to Ukraine. Like Biden truly did care about Ukraine, but he had his own worries, his own policies, and own interests. So it's fair to say that as well. That Biden just kind of decided, and he was very apparently micromanaging a lot of decisions. Right, he was very implicated, not like Trump, where he just kind of usually, governs with give me 3, 4 scenarios and I'll pick the one that I like the most. Right? You think that Trump somehow reads every single morning a brief of what's going on around the world and a deep analysis of the tensions between India and Pakistan and what are the implications if scenario A happens and scenario B, like he cares about that truly. Like, come on. And so that's the difference between Biden and Trump, is that Biden was really in it. He was really, in my personal opinion, micromanaging every decision with regards to Ukraine, whereas Trump is very laissez-faire, but he also kind of doesn't want to pick any sides. So anyways, I really went off track here, to be honest. But I really do cross my finger that, as you mentioned, Les, that Trump does not unfreeze the Russian funds. It'll make Euro in bad position to raise the population tax, and it might impact the international support. Yeah, well, that's one of the cards that Europe and US have, is that they have frozen the Russian funds, and unfreezing it would be very bad, in my opinion. And this would be the fund that could rebuild Ukraine, because Russia started this war. Russia provoked this war for over 11 years, and Russia needs to pay reparations to Ukraine, compensate Ukraine. And so I do cross my finger that Trump isn't going to just say, "Oh, we have peace now. Now let's just release the funds back to Russia." Wait. It's Russia that started the war. And Europe, I don't think is going to be letting Russia off the hook so easily. Maybe US will do that, but there's still over 300 plus $1 billion or euros of frozen Russian assets in Europe. So I don't think Europe is going to, at least I have very full confidence that Europe is not going to go the same trajectory if Trump decides to unfreeze it in the United States. Because Europe understands very well that Russia is going to utilize those funds to rearm, rebuild its military, and come back again in the Baltics, etc. I think that is extremely possible. So, as I've said, for the ceasefire that Putin announced, he's going to utilize that to rearm for the next, for 3 days. He's going to use that ceasefire to move a lot of air defense systems to Moscow, because he needs to provide security to the world leaders that are coming. Of course, there's going to be Lukashenko. He always comes, his little satellite dictator. There's all the Stan countries, right? Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and all the very dependent countries in Central Asia. They're going to come and visit. There are rumors, as I mentioned, of Xi Jinping being invited. Remains to be seen if he's going to come. Maybe 50% chance, but he wants to really secure the Red Square to make sure that there's not a single Ukrainian drone flying towards Moscow, which will leave an opportunity for Ukraine during that time to strike high-value targets. So that's going to be great news. But again, any of these announcements by Putin is absolutely worthless. And again, nobody took it seriously. Nobody, even the U.S. president, Trump, didn't say anything about it. Like, nobody believes Russia, because the Russians don't even believe themselves. So, as I said once, is trusting and believing Putin is not respecting oneself, and that's really true, because even the Russians don't respect themselves, and they don't trust themselves when they speak. So much for the beacon of democracy. Talk is cheap. Prevent escalation, but yeah, with all respect for Mr. Joe Biden, right? It was de-escalation management. We remember that. At least that's going to be part of the legacy of Biden, is de-escalation management. And there's more and more stories coming out of how they panicked when Ukraine struck Moskva, the Black Sea flagship Moskva, when Ukraine destroyed it back in April of 2022 with 8 new Neptune missiles. And the White House panicked. They didn't expect it to happen. And they were worried that this would provoke nuclear strikes from Russia. So you're seeing that they were way too sensitive. And they really, and again, it showcases, unfortunately, that whether it be Biden, Obama, or Trump, or any other president in the US, they don't want a Russian collapse. It's clear. They don't want Russia to collapse. If they wanted that, Ukraine would have won a long time ago. Ukraine would have received the weapons it needed 2, 3 years ago. Well, 2.5 years ago, back in 2022, and Ukraine could have, sealed the deal when Russia was the weakest, right? When they were pulling away from territories in Kherson, in Kiev, in Kharkiv, Ukraine would have won this. But unfortunately, the US continues with the policy of we're going to give just enough for Ukraine to be able to defend itself, perhaps attack a little bit, go on defensive, but not enough, to win and truly damage Russia to a point that they're going to collapse. This kind of cutting the salami in thin slices approach, and it's not working. It's clearly not working because Russia, can adapt. Russia can find new allies. Russia can manipulate, and they could care less about the economy, the tariffs, the sanctions. You're seeing how the Russians are just willing to die for even a bag of carrots or an electric meat grinder. I shared that with you guys on YouTube community in one of the posts, I think a few weeks ago, where a mother of a dead Russian soldier received an electric meat grinder. Just a true display of the attitude in Russia for human life. It's worse than, treated worse than the life of animals. Snowden ain't compared to the current administration. You mean Snowden, the one hiding in Russia? If it is now that North Korean troops are on the front line, why there is not at least one country to send support with troop in Ukraine? What's going on with the alliance of willing? Oh, troops. Okay. If it is now that North Korea troops are on the front line, why there is not at least one country? Well, because they want to get involved, right? It's for countries like North Korea, Iran, Russia, it's easy because they don't care about the lives of their people. For Europe, for the US, it's a different mindset. Imagine telling an American citizen, oh, now you're going to have to go and fight in Ukraine because it's important. It doesn't have the same weight as, you think it would. And I think we're kind of overestimating, unfortunately, what the American people, or even here in Canada, what people think about the war in Ukraine. Many of them forgot about it, right? It's here that we live in this kind of informational bubble of, Ukraine is important. Ukraine, we need to continue supporting it. And thank God we have people like that, with like you guys. But many people forgot a long time ago about the war in Ukraine. They're like, oh yeah, it's been going on for like 3 years. What about the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria? People forgot about it. It was going on for like over a decade until Assad and his regime collapsed completely. That's just one of our mechanisms where we cope. We try to just kind of forget about the negativity around the world. And unfortunately, that's what's going on here. So it's hard to convince countries in Europe to put boots on the ground. Although I do think that they should. And I think that the European leaders right now are trying to wake up their population in saying that this world of peace and kumbaya and we're never going to have wars again in Europe, it's over, right? The whole world system is breaking apart. Where is the UN or whatever, the International Criminal Court, when it comes to prosecuting Putin? When at the same time, Trump has put sanctions on them because they are trying to prosecute Netanyahu. I mean, it's all falling apart, unfortunately. All these old systems that were set up after World War II are no longer functional. Where are they mediating this conflict right now between India and Pakistan? The tensions are very high. Nowhere to be seen. Where's Guterres? Where you need him? He's somewhere quietly, praising Putin, but there's no mention of them being involved in the tensions between Pakistan and India. So unfortunately, the whole world system right now has fallen apart, collapsed, and that will leave us with, unfortunately, a global war. But it remains to be seen how global and how intense it will be, unfortunately. I would like to be wrong here, but I'm just seeing all the signs that the tensions are only increasing, especially with the United States that is just unwilling and is openly voicing it. Look at the statements from Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Trump that we're no longer going to be helping Europe and NATO, and they're going to have to pay for their own security. What kind of message does that give to countries like Russia? Well, we could try to go for the Baltics. Why not? After all, the US is pulling away. more and more. So yeah, uh, new covert cabal video. Canada's 51st state. Well, I can tell you firsthand that that's never going to happen. And I think the Canadians, that brings me actually to the one of the last points I wanted to talk about is the Canadian elections. It's a clear statement by the Canadians that we're not going the American way. And actually, we have been scared off by what happened in the US with Trump getting elected, where millions of people just decided that their votes didn't count or they didn't bother to vote. And then, what happened is history. But Canada voted for a fourth consecutive liberal government. To be fair, I do understand the people that voted for conservatives. I did mention in one of my live streams back in January that, and it's crazy. It's honestly crazy how Trump really shifted the fortunes for the Liberal Party in Canada. For our Canadian viewers, you guys know how unpopular Trudeau became, right? He was really in the last few months as prime minister, he became deeply unpopular, and it looked like the Conservatives were going to absolutely blow it, uh, like in the right sense, like they were going to crush the Liberals. And what happened was a complete reversal in the last few months as Trump continued to put pressure on Canada. We're going to be the 51st state. We're going to wage economic war, more tariffs because you're not, apparently we're nasty to the Americans. Then, the whole border with US is an imaginary line. He was kind of using similar tactics by Putin with regards to Ukraine, right? Like I just saw like analogies and similarities with how Putin was trying to justify his war in Ukraine, that this was Lenin that invented Ukraine, and actually the borders are fake, and the Ukrainian people, like were an idea of Lenin or some other Tsar in Russia. Like you could see a lot of similarities between what Putin was saying and Trump in the last few months. But the Canadians clearly voiced that we do not want to be part of the United States. We have different systems, different ideologies, and what happened is really good. What we have is a minority government, which means that this Liberal Party, uh, you know, Canadians have, I think, voted pretty well in the sense that we didn't give full control to the Liberal Party because we know that they've made a lot of promises also under Trudeau and they haven't delivered, unfortunately. And so Carney has to do a lot of work to prove that the Liberal Party can still govern efficiently and make the right decisions. So I think that this is very good. And the Conservatives completely blew it in a negative way. And their party leader, Pierre Poilievre, lost his riding. He lost his seat, meaning that, yeah, he's technically the leader of the Conservative Party, but he's not an MP. That's crazy. So the only solution here is that he needs to ask one of his Conservative MPs that was elected somewhere to step down so he can have a by-election so he can get actually elected. So you can imagine how difficult that conversation must be for that one MP that, sacrificed a lot of time to win his riding or her riding, to be told, you know what, you need to step away because our party leader is quite important because he wasn't able to win his riding. He wasn't able to convince his own people in his own riding to vote for him. That's pretty bad. So the Conservatives have really a lot of work to do and a lot of inward introspection to make, because I think what scared the Canadians away from the Conservatives is that just saying that you're the alternative to the Liberals wasn't enough. And also, they've utilized a lot of the similar narratives that the Republican Party under Trump did, right? Woke ideology and the, what else did they say? Like, they're using a bunch of slogans, Canada first, and that they didn't condemn Trump's actions in the beginning either. Pierre, the leader, Pierre Poilievre, refrained in the first few weeks of Trump really, augmenting his pressure on Canada. He refrained from really saying anything negative towards Trump. And that really hurts the Conservatives because they weren't, this traditional Conservative Party anymore. They were trying to, kind of play both sides. These kind of really hard right wingers that would usually vote for the Conservatives, but also try to keep the traditional, more pro-Canadian but more traditional conservative voters, and that doesn't work. So they really blew it here. So yeah, that's that. Let me read some of your comments, guys. Demographics takes a long time. Eat my maple leaf, Eric. I think Eric you were talking about the new Cover Cabal video. You weren't saying that you want Canada as a 51st state. Allegedly, Camp Huachuca is now a big part of the wall. Surfer, I'm not really sure what you mean here. Where's Camp Huachuca? Americans aren't buying Trump lies and excuses. Yeah, and I fully agree with you. That's what I'm saying. Like, the midterms are going to be pretty bad for Trump. I have high hopes that it's going to happen. I think even a lot of Republican voters that voted for Trump and are realizing the disastrous effects of Trump's policies and how he has absolutely no idea what he's doing. And I've seen a lot of, maybe it's the cherry picking, but I've seen a lot of like news media covering, stories of farmers in the Midwest that are like traditionally red and vote red. They're saying like, he's hurting us, and I really do regret voting for Trump because now my ability to make money, to do business with China has been hindered. Some of them are still very reluctant to say, it was a mistake. It's hard to admit that you made a mistake. Anybody can say that, in your lifetime, agreeing and saying that, what, my opinion wasn't right, I made a mistake, is difficult. So it's still going to take some time. But when your wallets, and that's the most important thing that Trump is messing with, when your savings, your wallets are being impacted, your jobs are being impacted, you have nothing to lose because you can't even feed yourself anymore. And Trump is playing with that, right? When he's turning the American people into even more low class citizens, they have nothing to lose anymore. And so they will turn their backs on Trump eventually if he continues down this path, this very destructive path with regards to the economy. No, Poilievre is not MAGA. Well, for a moment, Frakis, I have to disagree. For a moment, he was giving a lot of interviews to pro-MAGA people. Think of Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro. And he knew very well that many of his voters in Canada were definitely MAGA. Especially in Alberta, we do have a very fringe minority in Alberta and the prairies that's, separatists and actually want to be joining the United States. Like there's a small movement. And even he, I believe a few years ago, was working with these types of people as well. Um, so I would disagree that Pierre maybe not is entirely MAGA. Then he eventually realized that he needs to actually start speaking up and saying, you know what, Canada is never going to be the 51st state, but he did it way too late during the campaign when, like, buddy, you had to say day one when Trump was threatening Canada with this whole rhetoric. And he abstained from doing that for many, many days and weeks, basically just trying to attack the liberals and saying it's their fault and it's the same government and it's Trudeau. And, like he wasn't really, in my opinion, taking the right actions when they should have been made. But I understand, and I need to highlight this. I understand the people that voted for the Conservatives. I need to highlight that. Even at a moment, I did think of voting Conservative, and I'm not hiding it. I voted for the Liberal Party here, but it was only because I thought, and I do believe that Mark Carney, the current Prime Minister, has the resume and experience to deal with the whole tariff war that Trump has basically thrown on Canada. But I do understand why many people voted for the Conservatives. To be fair, the Conservatives, I might have exaggerated. They didn't completely blow it. They performed very well in this election, right? It was a very tight race between the Conservative Liberals. They've won the most seats in decades in Canada, but they could have done much better if their leader was actually a better politician and understood better, how to govern and how to actually enact policies or talk about policies. Instead, he was just kind of using a lot of slogans and populism as kind of his main tool to try to get elected, which hasn't really worked for him personally. But I do understand the many Canadians trying to vote Conservatives because I get it. We were getting tired of Trudeau. We were getting tired of this kind of just identity politics and also gaslighting from the Trudeau government. And yeah, I agree with you, Hugh. A lot of Canadians were concerned that Pierre Poilievre would be Trump 2.0, and especially for women, right? Like he didn't really make his position very clear with regards to reproductive rights, and it seemed to be like he was leaning more towards like a very very conservative anti-abortion position. Again, your position can differ here, and it's fair. But I think it scared a lot of women, especially in Canada, to see that a lot of their rights can be taken away. And so I think, yeah, myself included, I was very concerned because Pierre was using very similar tactics compared to the Trump administration during this election. And I don't like populism. I don't like to just hear about slogans and how bad the other side is, right? Like, they did this and that, and just giving me like promises that like the economy is going to be so much better under us. Tell me about your policies. Tell me about how you're actually trying to get to where you want to get to. Like, what is step number one, two, three? That's what I care about. And I thought that the liberals provide a much better platform compared to the conservatives, whereas they released their economic budget plan like a few days before the elections. To me, it's like you had years to prepare that, and only now you're releasing that a few days before the elections. That's very, very shady. And also, another thing that I didn't like about Pierre is that um, he didn't want to answer questions. He was limiting reporters to ask questions up to four per reporter, I believe, and they were filtering these questions. So they were trying to really control the narrative and the message during the campaign. They didn't allow any reporters they didn't allow any reporters to fly with them or tour with them on the bus. They had to do this on their own account, which didn't facilitate their job of covering their campaign tour. So everything was showcasing that they were trying to really keep a tight grip on the narrative, on the messaging, which is a huge red flag, because you see that your leader doesn't want to answer tough questions. When, yeah, you're going to have to answer tough questions because you're planning to be the prime minister, just as any other president in other countries. You're going to have to deal with tough situations where people are not going to agree with you, where maybe your position is going to be questioned. And so that's where you show your true colors. And so to me, that was just one of the many red flags that I saw. So I think the conservatives have a lot of inward. They have to look at themselves and kind of rethink their position, their political spectrum, where they're at right now, and they have to completely change, in my opinion, because this old formula of just kind of that they were using before is simply not working anymore. Although I must admit that they have performed pretty well this election. Let me read some of your comments. Canadians shouldn't let Trump affect their elections, but yet Trump still tried to, sway the election results. And now he's claiming that the best party won because of him, right? As if it would have changed if it was the conservatives that won. He would have said the same thing, that the best party won, and he swayed the decisions of the Canadians to make the right decision. For Trump, it's always about, I'm a winner, I'm never a loser, everything goes super well, and there's never any bad things that happen around me. I'm only the greatest, and I only make great deals. Exactly, Irene, I agree. PP controlled his media coverage and gave preference to right-wing media. Clearly, that to me was a huge red flag. You need to allow any media, whether it be right-wing, left-wing, central, it doesn't matter. Like, you need to be questioned by anybody, any type of political spectrum media. If Canadian government flirt with state of Maine and Washington, California every day, say they are welcome to join our good alliance, and we are still very interested. Trust me, USA would react strongly. Of course. If Canada starts saying, "Oh, California was never part of the US. California was taken by the US through Mexico, like back in the late 1800s." I don't remember exactly. Right, illegally taken by the United States. They should join Mexico, right? California should be part of Mexico and parts of Texas. And we can take Maine because it's an artificial line. Maine and New Hampshire and all of these other upper states, northeastern states, they should be part of Canada, right? It's all an artificial line after all. And they're closer to Canadian identities to the American identities. Like, imagine how, half the population, if not more, in the US would just flip against the Canadians. They're doing this, and Trump is doing this because he knows that he's a world power. Who is going to do anything on the United States? You think that Canada is going to, start a tariff war, start it themselves? Of course not. He knows, unfortunately, that he's in charge of the most powerful and strongest country in the world, militarily speaking and economically speaking. So that's what gives Trump a lot of leeway into doing this. Um, well, NDP did lose a lot for Liberal overall. Yes, and that's another thing you need to mention is that a lot of the people that it was a strategic voting, right? A lot of people that were historic NDP voters. That's the third party for those that don't know in Canada, the New Democratic Party, that is very left socialist, like not in the bad sense, just more like a social democrat party that is very about making a lot of social programs and like kind of protecting the disabled and the minorities. A lot of those voters, because they knew the threats of allowing, let's say, in their eyes, of allowing the conservatives to win, they voted strategically for the liberals because they knew that the NDP had no choice, had no chance, I should say, in their riding. So you saw the NDP vote absolutely erode completely. They got like 3-4% of the votes. It's crazy how they were absolutely crushed this election, to the point that their leader, Jagmeet Singh, had to resign, and rightfully so, because he did not differentiate his party from the Liberals. And so that was a very big disaster for the NDP. Actually, the biggest loser of this election is the NDP, quite frankly. The New Democratic Party. Hello from Waterloo. Thank you. 1847 or so. Mexican-American War. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I said late 1800s, but it's more mid 1800s. So yeah, imagine if Mexico said, you know what, actually part of California and Texas and New Mexico is part of our country, and you took it away. We have the right to take it back, and start using similar tactics to what Trump is currently using against Canada or Denmark with regards to Greenland. I mean, right? Like next day you would see massive protests and Americans taking their weapons to sound ready to protect the United States. Kind of a double standard here, don't you think? And as a longtime labor union member, I will say that not many union members identify with the NDP anymore. Yeah, that's one thing actually that really helped Pierre, and I must give credit to Pierre. He did a lot of work in Ontario and other more like provinces in Canada that are more, industrial labor or full of labor movements. He went into these specific areas in Ontario, in the prairies, and met with these blue collar workers in factories, construction workers, etc. And that really helped the Conservatives win a lot of ridings actually in Ontario. Ontario was kind of the big X factor that denied the Liberal Party to have this majority, because Pierre did a lot of work there. So we need to give credit to Pierre, because he was able to sway a lot of these people to vote for the Conservatives, which denied the Liberal Party this majority that they thought they would have. So I agree with you, Frakis, that the NDP didn't do that whatsoever. I didn't really see much of Jagmeet Singh, their leader, their then leader, the NDP, doing that. He was talking, even during the debates, he was talking about the pharmacare and pretty much just the healthcare system. That was the only thing he was talking about. I'm like, I mean, I get it. It's important. It's a big part of Canada, our public healthcare system, but we have so many more issues than just that. We have the economy. We have our military spending that we need to get right, our procurement system in the military, housing, affordability. And the only thing he was pretty much talking about the whole time was about, you force the Liberals to implement pharmacare and national dental care and increased and improved our public healthcare system. I get it's important, but that's not the whole thing. George, hello from Texas. Great chat. Thank you, George, for tuning in from Texas. Appreciate it. So yeah, another last thing before I end this video, or this stream, I should say. I said I would do 30 to 40 minutes, but I'm clearly way past the time. But I'm having fun, so that's good. Something that I was really shocked today, I wasn't expecting this, but there was a murder attempt. If you guys have been watching my videos, I've been talking a lot about the Serhiy Sternenko volunteer fund that he has created about 2 years ago, where he basically provides drones to the Ukrainian brigades throughout the front line. It's a very effective fund, and he is able to provide over 500 to 1,000 drones per day to the Ukrainian military, to various brigades throughout different front lines. And there was an assassination attempt on him today, which really, really shocked me. And I think it happened somewhere in Kiev, where, and you're seeing here that Russia is continuing with its work of recruiting um, a- agents in Ukraine to do their dirty laundry for them. That is assassinating high value targets in Ukraine, just like Ukraine is doing the same type of work in Russia. And so, just to let you know, guys, that there was an assassination attempt on Serhiy Sternenko. It's not the first time I've talked about him. He's a very important figure, a very important volunteer, a very effective one. Thankfully, he survived. Thankfully, it was some old lady that was recruited by the Russians, apparently. And thankfully, she wasn't able to aim properly. She was just waiting outside of a building where he was coming out of, just by the staircase. And she started firing at him, and thankfully, he was able to dodge the shots and survive this assassination attempt. But just to tell you how the Russians are still doing a lot of work within Ukraine, and that's one of the main issues right now in Ukraine, is that um, they're able to recruit a lot of youngsters as well. This particular time with some old lady, as I mentioned. So again, they're able to recruit because many Ukrainians, unfortunately, they're ready to sell their soul for money. Unfortunately, it's not like everybody in Ukraine is perfect, and everybody's pro Ukraine. And so the Russian FSB or any other secret services are really working hard on Telegram and other social media to sway, especially the younger Ukrainians, to do their dirty laundry. That is blowing up facilities, killing high value targets, and they're paying them a lot of money. That's the other thing is, like they're very generous payments. If that lady was successful in her attempt of killing. And again, I'm not sure what she was expecting. Like, okay, you kill him, but how do you get away? Like, the SBU, the Ukrainian secret services, are very effective. They're capable of finding people very quickly, just like in Russia as well. So I'm not sure what her game plan was, but she was swayed because of generous payments from the Russian secret services, and that is a huge issue right now in Ukraine. Is that you're seeing a lot of Ukrainians being able to being recruited by the Russian secret services to do this. So that really shocked me today because his work is really important for the Ukraine military, and so we almost lost a very good person today, or at least a very effective activist that has done a lot for the Ukrainians. So yeah, hope he's okay. Yeah, and he's okay. He said it. He posted today on Telegram saying that he's not in critical condition whatsoever, and he was able to come out completely unscathed. So that is wonderful. But just to tell you guys that this is very, very dangerous, and the Russians are not going to stop at anything to get to crush the Ukrainians, right? And they're even able to recruit young Ukrainian people to do that. So that is quite concerning. Is there any contact with resistance in occupied territory of Ukraine? I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is between the Ukrainian intelligence services and these partisans in occupied territories, but you can understand how difficult it is, right? Like as soon as their identities are found, it's pretty much game over for them, right? And you don't know what happens to them, so they need to be very diligent. And so we can't really reveal or know any information about it. So I live in the same information like world as you guys. I don't have any insiders from occupied territories, and I'm sure that they're doing a lot of great work. And only after the war is over, we're gonna hear about these heroic stories from these partisans working deep in occupied territories, whether it be in Zaporizhia, in Donetsk, in Crimea. It's kind of the unsung heroes because we don't hear from them, unfortunately. And if they're found out, well, you can imagine what type of fate awaits them, unfortunately. And exactly, that sounds like World War II in France, right? Like there was a huge resistance movement in France under the Vichy government, but it's similar here in Ukraine, and that is one of the big issues for Russia because they not only have to watch what's in front of them, but they also have to watch their backs because there's always the possibility of them getting blown up, right? Or them getting murdered or poisoned or whatever. There was even been a few months ago a policy that was instated by the Russian military that the Russian soldiers that were able to leave their positions for vacation, whatever, that they could not go to the border, the coastal cities of Berdyansk, Mariupol, right? Like kind of back before the war, they were traditionally kind of resort areas for Ukrainians, like Berdyansk, Mariupol, Crimea. Um, all these regions, and so now they told him to not go there because there's been a lot of assassinations of Russian soldiers, right? They get drunk, obviously, right? Pure Russian tradition. They get wasted and then they disappear, never to be found again. They don't come back to report back to duty. And so they found that, clearly there's some deep Ukrainian resistance going on where they're doing a lot of work to kill these Russian soldiers. They're trying to take a vacation. So let me read some of your comments here. Getting closer to Russia is a good idea if you can do it and still be okay, but I still don't like rushing it. I don't like losing our other alliances. You're replying to comments, I believe. Not really sure the context here, but yeah. Chris Slava Zesu, thank you, Sir Shroom. Sir Shroom. Sir Shroom. Sir Shroom, thank you. Heroim Slava. Is the US still in NATO? No. It's still part of NATO, but I don't think that the US, based on Trump's last statements and Pete Hegseth and the whole gang, that they're very interested in keeping up with supporting NATO. It's just kind of a status symbol right now, but I think they've made it very clear that NATO is not something that's going to stick for much longer, in my opinion. That's where we're seeing Europe dramatically shifting their position right now. We've talked about it a few weeks ago that Europe is ready to reinvest over $800 billion collectively into its military. And so they're really understanding now that they're on the same boat as Ukraine, that nobody's going to come and save them. And quite frankly, it's a good thing because back before the whole Trump era, Trump 2 came, Europe was very paralyzed by Washington, right? Every decision had to come first from Washington before Europe could then act. We saw that even with Biden. They waited for Biden to do or say something before they actually would follow through with many of these decisions of transferring weapons, assistance, etc. Now, Europe is waking up, understanding that it has a lot of weight, it has a lot of influence, but it just needs time. It takes time. Better late than ever. This should have been done over 3 years ago. But thankfully, we're seeing that Europe is waking up. Europe is doing a lot of work right now, and they're taking the helm, which is really important. I've said about the minerals deal is that thanks to Europe and their leadership, they've allowed the Ukrainians to get more preferential treatment from the US, better agreement to be signed that is not an extortionist deal, quite frankly, that didn't force Ukraine to repay over $350 billion of debt, which was clearly invented, right? At best, Ukraine owed the US $70 billion. And even then, that was free assistance provided by Biden. It was not under debt. These were just old weapons transferred to Ukraine, most of it. And a lot of it was reinvested back in the US economy, its own military. So there was no debt. But he invented that figure and said, why not? Let's throw it at Ukraine and let's see what happens. Maybe they'll sign it. Maybe they'll be complete idiots and desperate idiots. Maybe they'll sign it. And so we're seeing that Europe really assisted Ukraine in moments where it was weak a few months ago. So Europe is waking up and we're heading in the right direction right now. And we are understanding more and more that we live in a much different world than we did even 5-10 years ago. And that's, a lot of this imperialism, these dictatorships are waking up and they're being more daring. They will go for more aggressive tactics. And China is part of that gang. Russia, of course, North Korea, Iran, and other actors, which, we don't talk often about. So, yeah. Is NATO something anymore? And that's a huge question, Les, as well. I agree. Like, we're talking about if Russia attacks the Baltics, that's just gonna crush them. It's the final blow for Russia. But here's my thing. That's my last kind of parting comments here. How do we know how effective NATO really is? Because as far as I'm concerned, they've been only fighting desert terrorists or very weak militaries in the last few decades. They've never went against a country like Russia, or actually, of course, Russia's been severely weakened, but Russia's still a massive military. I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, look at them," they have absolutely nothing. Russia's still a large military, has a large presence. They still have hundreds of air jet fighters, of over 3,000 tanks left, and they're capable of building more or getting more from China, from North Korea, artillery systems. They've turned their economy into a full total war economy, right? And so to say, just saying that Russia's not going to be effective, NATO is a much more modern military, they're going to crush them, I would not jump so fast to that conclusion, because we don't know how effective NATO really is when it comes down to fighting. Russia, which has been fighting over 11 years, has adapted, just like Ukraine, has adopted new tactics. And as we've seen, simply disregards human life. Is NATO really willing to grind it out like the Ukrainians are right now, if it comes down to that? To fight multi-year war with a Russian military that is just going to throw meat at you because it just has millions of people left. And for them, all they need is a Kalashnikov, a few rounds, a few grenades, and that's it. You're by your own, buddy. But that's fine for them. Is NATO really prepared for that? So that's a huge question mark, because when it comes down to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are small countries with very small populations. If the US, which seems to be the case right now, completely pulls out of NATO, and you're seeing still European countries that are uncertain if they should put boots on the ground or not, like Trump, Putin could very well go for it, in my opinion. He could very well test out NATO. He tested Ukraine, he tested Georgia, he tested Syria, and he came out with, Ukraine. It was not a slap on the wrist. It was a massive punch to the face, to say the least, by the Ukrainians, and continues to be a massive punch to Putin. But right, like he still is alive. He still remains to be unchallenged within Russia. And so to me, that's a huge question mark, is how ready NATO is and how effective NATO is against fighting Russia. Because fighting terrorists in the Middle East is not the same ballgame as fighting the Russian military, unfortunately. So that's the live stream for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to continue making my live streams. I'm likely going to make a video this weekend, over the map changes as well. So I'm very thankful again for your support. Really thankful for your support to Ukraine as well. It's absolutely paramount that we continue donating to the Ukraine military or providing humanitarian aid. The Ukrainians absolutely need it. And I'm more than confident that we're going to get there. Very confident that Ukraine will prevail down the line. Nations like Russia do not exist forever, and eventually they will crumble, like we've seen the Soviet Union crumble and many other dictatorships crumble. That's the fate that Russia will see eventually. I have no doubt about it, but it's just a question of time and when it's going to happen. So thank you so much. Ukraina ponad uсе. That is correct, Sir Fides. And I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Україні. Дякую всім.